The air in Thorne Logistics' warehouse office wasn't just cold. It felt sterile, deliberately stripped of warmth, much like the gaze of the man seated behind the oversized steel desk. Mateo Rivera stood rigidly before it, the invoice he'd meticulously prepared for the problematic Evergreen account clutched in his slightly trembling hand. He'd stayed 3 hours late last night, cross-referencing manifests, tracing shipping discrepancies, salvaging the contract everyone else had written off. His knuckles were white where they gripped the paper. Mr. Thorne didn't look up. He flipped a page in a glossy industry magazine, the rustle unnaturally loud in the silence. Mateo cleared his throat, the sound swallowed by the cavernous room. "Sir? The Evergreen reconciliation. I have it resolved. They've confirmed payment." Thorne finally glanced up, his pale eyes sweeping over Mateo without landing, lingering instead on the invoice held out towards him. He didn't take it. "Rivera," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of the grudging respect Mateo had earned through 2 years of relentless work. "Put it on Jenkins' desk. He'll handle the client follow-up." A familiar knot tightened in Mateo's stomach. Jenkins handled client follow-up about as effectively as a screen door on a submarine. It was Mateo who navigated the complexities, who smoothed ruffled feathers, who spoke the language, both literally and figuratively, of clients Thorne Logistics increasingly relied on, but whose communities Thorne clearly disdained. "Sir," with respect, Mateo kept his voice level, betraying none of the simmering frustration. Jenkins wasn't involved in the recovery. The client liaison specifically requested I oversee the account moving forward. They were impressed with the resolution. Thorne's gaze sharpened, finally locking onto Mateo's face. There was no warmth there, only a flicker of something colder, harder. "Impressed?" He leaned back, the leather chair groaning slightly. "They were impressed because you cleaned up a mess your people probably caused in the first place with their relaxed approach to deadlines and paperwork." He waved a dismissive hand, encompassing Mateo, the invoice, the invisible weight of prejudice in the room. "Don't mistake desperation for competence, Rivera. Evergreen needed their shipment, and you happened to be the tool available." The words landed like physical blows. Asterisk your people. Relaxed approach. Tool. Asterisk Mateo felt the heat rise in his neck, a counterpoint to the icy air conditioning. He forced himself to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The invoice crinkled in his tightening grip. "The delays were due to customs documentation errors on our end, sir," he corrected, his voice barely above a whisper but cutting through the quiet. "Errors I identified and corrected." Thorne's lips thinned into a humorless line. He pushed himself up, leaning his knuckles on the desk. "See, that's the problem right there," he said, his voice dropping, gaining a dangerous edge. "You always have an answer. Always think you know better. You walk in here with your solutions, acting like you own the place." He leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and mint. "You need to understand your place. This company," he gestured vaguely around the office, towards the bustling warehouse floor visible through the glass partition. "It wasn't built for your kind. You people don't grasp the discipline, the structure required to run something like this. You don't belong here, Rivera. Not really. You're useful, for now, in the capacity you were hired for. Stick to that." The words, "you people don't belong here," hung in the sterile air, thick and suffocating. They weren't shouted, but delivered with a chilling certainty that made them far worse than anger. It was a statement of fact in Thorne's world, as immutable as the steel desk between them. Mateo's vision blurred for a second, the harsh fluorescent lights stinging his eyes. He saw not just the sneering face of his boss, but the countless microaggressions that paved his path at Thorne Logistics. The overlooked ideas credited to others, the subtle exclusion from key meetings, the way his perfectly drafted reports were scrutinized with unnecessary harshness. This was the ugly core of it, laid bare. He didn't flinch. He met Thorne's gaze, the storm inside him locked behind a mask of unnerving stillness. He carefully, deliberately, placed the invoice on the edge of Thorne's immaculate desk, the paper slightly crumpled now. "My capacity," Mateo said, his voice surprisingly steady, low and resonant, "includes saving your company hundreds of thousands of dollars, Mr. Thorne." Repeatedly. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out, each step measured, his back straight, feeling Thorne's icy stare boring into him until the heavy office door clicked shut behind him. The noise of the warehouse floor, the clang of metal, the whine of forklifts, the shouted instructions, crashed over him like a wave. It usually felt like energy, purpose. Now it felt chaotic, jarring. He moved on autopilot, nodding curtly at Carlos, the foreman, who gave him a concerned look, sensing the tension radiating off him. Mateo brushed past pallets stacked high with goods bound for markets Thorne profited from, but whose people he despised. The irony tasted bitter. He didn't stop at his cramped workstation. He grabbed his worn leather jacket from the back of his chair and kept walking, pushing through the heavy bay doors into the gray afternoon drizzle. The cool, damp air was a relief after the office's artificial chill. He leaned against the rough brick exterior of the building, closing his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. The echo of Thorne's words reverberated in his skull. "You people don't belong here." "Rough one, amigo." The voice, warm with concern, came from his left. Luis Hernandez, a driver Mateo had known since their days unloading trucks for a different, even less reputable company, leaned against the wall beside him, lighting a cigarette. Luis had seen it all. Mateo opened his eyes, staring at the rain-slicked asphalt of the parking lot. "Thorne," was all he said, the name heavy with meaning. Luis took a long drag, exhaling smoke that mingled with the mist. El Jeef delivered another dose of his special brand of sunshine. "Huh? What was it this time? Forgot to polish his boots with your shirt." A harsh, humorless laugh escaped Mateo. "Said we don't belong here. You people." Saving his evergreen account just proved we're too relaxed to understand real business. He mimicked Thorne's dismissive wave. Luis's easygoing expression hardened. He flicked ash violently onto the wet ground. "Hijo de." He cut himself off, shaking his head. "That man's soul is pickled in vinegar. He sees the numbers you pull, the clients you keep happy. He sees it. He just hates who is doing it." He looked at Mateo, his eyes serious. "You know what they do to racehorses that start winning too much against the favorites, Mateo? They find ways to hobble them, or put them down." The analogy was crude, but chillingly apartment Mateo pushed off the wall. "I need to walk." He didn't head straight home. He walked for blocks, the drizzle matting his hair, soaking into the shoulders of his jacket. Thorne's words weren't just an insult. They were a gauntlet thrown down, a denial of his very worth, his capability, his right to strive for more than just survival. "You don't belong." The phrase echoed with every step, morphing from a crushing blow into a cold, hard ember of defiance deep in his chest. Asterisk belong where? In his narrow, prejudiced world, asterisk maybe not. But that world wasn't the only one. He passed small storefronts, a bustling taqueria smelling of cilantro and grilled meat, a family-run mechanic's garage where old men argued over an engine block, a vibrant mercado spilling colorful produce onto the wet sidewalk. This was belonging. This was community. This was also a network of small businesses constantly battling larger, indifferent corporations like Thorne Logistics. An idea, fragile and dangerous, began to flicker at the edge of his exhaustion and anger. What if, by the time he reached the modest duplex he shared with Elena and their 7-year-old daughter, Sophia, the ember had grown warmer, fed by resentment and a desperate need to prove Thorne devastatingly wrong? He paused on the front step, taking a deep breath, consciously smoothing the tension from his face before turning the key. He wouldn't bring the poison inside. The warmth and scent of simmering garlic and onions enveloped him as he stepped into the small living room. Sophia launched herself at his legs. "Poppy," her small arms wrapped tightly around him, a balm against the day's ugliness. He scooped her up, burying his face in her hair, smelling shampoo and childhood. "Hola, mi corazón. Did you conquer the world today? Ms. Davies said my drawing was the best," Sophia declared, her eyes shining. "It's a dragon with butterfly wings." Elena emerged from the tiny kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile, always so ready for him, faltered as she took in his face. She saw what he tried to hide, the tightness around his eyes, the residual tension in his shoulders. "Long day?" she asked softly, coming closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. Mateo kissed Sophia's forehead and set her down. "Go show Poppy your dragon butterfly, princessa. I need to talk to Mommy for a minute." Sophia skipped off to retrieve her masterpiece. He followed Elena back into the kitchen. The small space was steamy, filled with the comforting sounds of bubbling pots. He leaned against the counter, the familiar domesticity a stark contrast to the sterile hostility of Thorne's office. He didn't need to recount the exact words. Elena read the story in the set of his jaw, the shadow in his eyes. "Thorne?" she asked, her voice tight. Mateo nodded, staring at the pot of beans simmering on the stove. "Same song, different verse. Louder. Meaner." He swallowed hard. He said, "We don't belong there, Elena. You people." "After I saved the Evergreen account." Elena's knuckles whitened on the dish towel. Anger flashed in her dark eyes, quickly replaced by a protective ferocity. "That miserable viejo," she hissed. "After everything you do for that place? The hours, the ideas he steals." She stepped closer, cupping his face. "You belong wherever you choose to be, Mateo Rivera. His small mind can't comprehend someone like you." He covered her hand with his own. Her belief was unwavering, a fortress against the world's thorns. "It's not just me," he said quietly, the flickering idea pushing forward. "It's Luis, Maria in billing, Javier in dispatch, everyone he looks down on while taking the money our work earns him." He paused, the words feeling dangerous, almost reckless. What if we didn't need him? What if we people built something of our own? Elena went very still, searching his face. "Built what?" Her voice was cautious, laced with the practical fear of bills and stability. "Logistics," Mateo said, the word tasting strange on his tongue in this context. But different. Focused. For the businesses Thorne ignores or exploits, the mercados, the importers, the small manufacturers in our communities. We know their needs. We speak their language. Literally. He gestured vaguely, the vision forming hazy but potent. No more arrogant bosses telling us we don't belong. We build where we belong. The enormity of it hung between them. The risk. The potential fallout. Elena's gaze held his, filled with love, fear, and a dawning spark of that same defiance burning within him. "It would be everything against us," she whispered. "Money. Connections. Thorne would try to crush it." "He'll try," Mateo acknowledged, the ember flaring into a small, determined flame. "But he doesn't know the fire he just lit." The following weeks were a tightrope walk. Mateo performed his duties at Thorne Logistics with robotic efficiency, his mind a whirlwind of secret calculations and burgeoning plans. He became hyper-observant. He noted the inefficiencies Thorne ignored, the exorbitant fees charged to smaller clients for special handling, the inconsistent scheduling that caused delays for businesses operating on razor-thin margins, the dismissive attitude of the sales team towards non-corporate accounts. He meticulously documented client frustrations he overheard or that were casually dismissed by supervisors. He started discreet conversations. A shared coffee break with Maria in billing became a whispered analysis of Thorne's opaque invoicing practices that often confuse small businesses. A lunch with Javier revealed the dispatcher's frustration with routes that underserved certain neighborhoods, deemed low priority. Luis, fueled by righteous anger and loyalty, became his confidant and scout, using his routes to quietly gauge interest among the small business owners he delivered to. The response was cautious but undeniable, a shared resentment of Thorne's impersonal service and high costs, a hunger for someone who understood their specific challenges. One rainy Tuesday, hunched over his kitchen table long after Elena and Sofia had gone to bed, spreadsheets illuminated by the glow of his laptop, Mateo faced the brutal numbers. Startup costs, a single-use truck, basic licensing, insurance, a skeletal phone system, were a mountain compared to their meager savings. The small cushion they had, painstakingly saved for Sofia's education and maybe, someday, a slightly bigger place, stared back at him from the spreadsheet, looking terrifyingly inadequate. Doubt, cold and heavy, settled over him. Was this madness? Trading the devil they knew for an abyss of uncertainty? Thorne's sneering face flashed in his mind. "You people don't belong." A gentle hand rested on his shoulder. Elena, wrapped in a robe, peered at the glowing screen. "The mountain looks high, mi vida," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep but clear with resolve. "It is," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Higher than I thought. Insurance alone." Elena squeezed his shoulder. "We climb mountains. That's what we do." She pointed at the line representing their savings. This is our foothold. We don't jump off the cliff tomorrow. We plan. We find others who want to climb too. She paused, her gaze steady. Abuelo's garage. Mateo looked up, startled. The small, detached garage behind her aging grandfather's house was currently filled with rusting lawnmowers and memories. Papa Julio's? He needs that space. He needs his nieto to build something more, Elena countered softly. He offered, Mateo. When I told him, he said the only thing rusting in there is potential. Rent-free, until we can stand. Her simple words carried the weight of generations, faith, sacrifice, and a fierce belief in the next climb. The mountain didn't shrink, but Mateo felt the ground firm beneath his feet. The next day, fueled by Elena's unwavering support and Papa Julio's tangible lifeline, Mateo took a calculated risk. He requested a meeting with Mr. Thorne. He needed access to historical client satisfaction data, ostensibly for a process improvement initiative he was drafting. Thorne, likely amused by Mateo's continued efforts to prove his worth, granted access with a dismissive wave, clearly expecting nothing consequential. Mateo dove into the data with the focus of a man possessed. Nights blurred into early mornings at the kitchen table. He wasn't just looking for trends. He was searching for the cracks in Thorne's armor, the underserved niches, the specific pain points Thorne deemed unworthy of attention. He cross-referenced complaint logs with client demographics and shipment types. A clear pattern emerged. Small to medium-sized businesses, particularly those owned by immigrants or catering to ethnic communities, experienced disproportionately higher rates of billing errors, unexplained delays, and significantly poorer communication resolution compared to Thorne's larger, corporate clients. The data was dry, impersonal, but it screamed neglect and implicit bias. It was the blueprint for their own venture's value proposition: reliability, transparency, and respect for businesses Thorne dismissed. He compiled his findings into a concise, professional report. It was good work, objectively. It outlined clear opportunities for Thorne to improve service and retain valuable, albeit smaller, clients. Part of him, the part still clinging to the hope of recognition within the existing structure, almost hoped Thorne would see its merit. He submitted it through the proper channels. A week passed. Silence. Then, on Friday afternoon, as Mateo was finalizing a complex customs clearance for a new client, a small Colombian coffee importer thrilled with his proactive approach, his desk phone rang. It was Thorne's assistant, her voice clipped. Mr. Rivera, Mr. Thorne would like to see you. Immediately, the summons felt ominous. Mateo took a steadying breath, smoothed his shirt, and walked the familiar path to the steel door. This time, Thorne wasn't alone. Jenkins, smirking slightly, leaned against a filing cabinet. Thorne held Mateo's report, not reading it, but tapping it rhythmically against the palm of his hand. The air crackled with a different kind of tension. Rivera, Thorne began, not inviting him to sit. This. He held up the report like it was soiled. Ambitious. Misguided. He tossed it onto the desk, where it slid towards Mateo. Wasted effort. We cater to growth sectors, Rivera. Major players. Not niche markets. He said the words niche markets with the same distaste he'd used for your people. Jenkins chimed in, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Mateo, buddy, you gotta understand. Chasing these small fries, it's not scalable. Costs more to service them than they're worth. Mr. Thorne's built this company on strategic vision. He patted Thorne's shoulder proprietorially. Thorne nodded. Exactly. Jenkins gets it. He understands where the real value lies. He fixed Mateo with that cold stare. Your time would be better spent supporting Jenkins on the Bronson account. Leave the community outreach fantasies to social workers. Stick to the tasks you're suited for. Running numbers. Filing paperwork. The dismissal was complete, the report a testament to ambition squashed. Thorne had not only rejected the ideas, but framed them as naive, wasteful, and fundamentally beneath the dignity of Thorne Logistics. He saw the data, Mateo realized with chilling clarity, and chose to see only confirmation of his own biases, not opportunity. Mateo looked from Thorne's dismissive sneer to Jenkins' smug satisfaction. The ember of defiance roared into an inferno. He didn't reach for the report. He met Thorne's gaze, his own eyes now reflecting a cold certainty that mirrored his boss's, but forged in a different fire. Understood, sir, he said, his voice devoid of inflection, a calm before a storm Thorne couldn't yet perceive. He turned and walked out, leaving his carefully researched indictment of Thorne's neglect lying on the steel desk. He didn't need it anymore. He carried the blueprint, and the burning need to execute it, within him. The gauntlet hadn't just been picked up. It had been melted down and reforged into a weapon. The climb had truly begun, and the first foothold was pure, unadulterated rage transformed into purpose. He knew, with absolute certainty, that Thorne would soon learn exactly what his kind was capable of building. The stakes weren't just about a job anymore. They were about dignity, community, and proving that belonging wasn't granted, it was forged. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but retreat was no longer an option. The rival company wasn't just an idea. It was a declaration of war, whispered in spreadsheets and fueled by the cold fury of the underestimated. Every step Mateo took away from that office felt heavier, yet charged with a terrifying, exhilarating energy. The real work, the dangerous work, started now. The fluorescent buzz of the warehouse felt like a swarm of angry insects trapped inside Mateo's skull. He moved through the familiar aisles stacked high with shrink-wrapped pallets, the scent of cardboard dust and diesel fuel thick in the air. His steps were deliberate, his expression schooled into the same focused neutrality he'd worn for weeks. But beneath the surface, tectonic plates had shifted. Thorne's dismissal of his report, the casual contempt alongside Jenkins' smirking complicity, hadn't just wounded, it had cauterized. The last fragile thread connecting him to the hope of recognition within Thorne Logistics had been severed. What remained was a cold, hard focus, sharper than any forklift blade. He was checking a shipment manifest for Javier when a low whistle cut through the ambient noise. Luis leaned against a stack of crates marked fragile glassware, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a watchful tension. "Heard the big man called you in," Luis murmured, his eyes scanning the overhead catwalks where his supervisor lingered. "Did he finally pin a medal on your report? Or just use it for target practice?" "Target practice," Mateo confirmed, his voice flat. He tapped the manifest. "Section 4B. Customs code is wrong. Should be 4823.90. Not 4821.10. Jenkins probably copied it from an old file. The error was minor but costly, a delay waiting to happen for the small ceramics importer whose goods filled the pallet. "Fix it before it ships." Luis scribbled a note, his expression grim. Jenkins wouldn't know a customs code if it bit him on his polished backside. "But sure, I'll handle the real work." He hesitated, lowering his voice further. "Words out, amigo. Thorne's been asking questions. Subtle ones. About who you talk to during breaks. Who you eat lunch with." Maria looked scared stiff when he casually asked about her weekend plans yesterday. A chill unrelated to the warehouse air swept through Mateo. Paranoia, a luxury he couldn't afford, began to coil in his gut. Thorne wasn't just dismissive. He was suspicious. The report, Mateo's sudden quiet intensity, it had pricked the man's arrogance. "Let him ask," Mateo said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "We're just employees doing our jobs." He met Luis's worried gaze. "Be careful, Luis. Watch your back." "Always do," Luis replied, but the usual bravado was absent. He shoved off the crates. "Papa Julio's place tonight? After shift?" Mateo nodded curtly. "After Sophia's asleep. 9. The rest of the shift passed in a nerve-wracking blur. Every glance from a supervisor felt loaded. Every time Thorne's office door opened, Mateo braced himself. He focused on the minutiae, correcting Jenkins' sloppy paperwork, rerouting a shipment delayed by a Thorne scheduler's oversight, his mind simultaneously churning over logistics, startup costs, and the terrifying reality of Thorne's watchful eye. He felt like a man walking a tightrope strung over shark-infested waters, carrying dynamite. Papa Julio's garage smelled of damp concrete, old motor oil, and possibility. Elena had swept the space clean, pushing decades of accumulated clutter, broken lawnmowers, cracked flower pots, bundles of yellowed newspapers, against the far wall. A single bare bulb hanging from a frayed cord cast long, stark shadows. In the cleared center stood a battered folding table salvaged from a curb, covered with Mateo's spreadsheets, Elena's meticulously organized notes on licensing requirements, and a large, hand-drawn map of the city marked with neighborhoods and potential client locations. Mateo, Elena, Luis, Maria from billing, and Javier from dispatch huddled around the table. The air vibrated with a potent mix of fear, anger, and desperate hope. Maria, usually composed, twisted a tissue in her hands. "He called me into his office again today," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Asked if I ever felt overlooked here. Said Thorne Logistics valued loyalty above all." It felt threatening. It was threatening, Javier rumbled, his broad shoulders tense. He pointed a thick finger at the map. "He knows something's up. That report Mateo did, it exposed too much. Showed how he treats the little guys. He doesn't like being shown his own mess." Luis paced the small, cleared space, his boots scuffing the concrete. "So what do we do? Fold before we even start? Let that viejo win." He stopped, facing the group. "He thinks we're nothing. Just tools. Replaceable. Let's show him we're a damn wrecking ball." Elena placed a steadying hand on Maria's arm. "We don't fold," she said, her voice firm despite the shadows under her eyes. "But we move smarter. Faster." He's sniffing around Mateo and Maria because they're the brains, the planners. She looked at Mateo. "We need a win. Something concrete. Something that proves this isn't just anger, it's a real business. Before he finds this place." Her gaze swept the humble garage, their fragile headquarters. Mateo stared at the map, the neighborhoods he'd marked: Little Bogota, the Vietnamese district along Pine Street, the cluster of family-owned factories near the old rail yard. His eyes landed on a specific mark: Café Aroma, Importador Colombiano. Senor Rojas, the owner, had been effusive in his thanks when Mateo untangled his latest customs snarl at Thorne. He'd also complained bitterly about Thorne's fees and unreliable delivery windows that hurt his small cafe supply business. "There's a shipment," Mateo said slowly, the idea crystallizing with terrifying clarity. "Senor Rojas, Café Aroma. A container of green coffee beans arriving from Buenaventura next Tuesday. Thorne Logistics has the contract." He traced the route on the map from the port to Café Aroma's warehouse. Jenkins handled the booking. He quoted Rojas a premium rate for expedited clearance and guaranteed delivery by 2 p.m. Tuesday. But Jenkins screwed up the paperwork again. "The harmonized system code is wrong. It's going to get flagged at customs. Guaranteed delay." Luis whistled softly. "So Thorne fails Rojas again. And if someone else were to magically have a truck and a guy who knows the right paperwork standing by." "Exactly," Mateo said, his pulse quickening. "We intercept, not steal," he added quickly, seeing the question in their eyes. "Rojas has the right to choose his logistics provider. If Thorne fails him, and we offer a solution, same day, correct paperwork, fair price. It's a huge risk," Javier said. "Thorne will scream theft. And if we mess it up, if Thorne's paperwork is wrong, customs holds the container," Mateo countered. "It could be days. Rojas's cafe runs on that shipment. He'd be desperate. We offer a lifeline after Thorne drops him. Legally, it's clean. Morally." He met their gazes. "We're offering service Thorne refuses to provide fairly. We're proving our people understand his business better than he does." The silence in the garage was thick. The plan was audacious, fraught with peril. Failure meant exposure, lawsuits, ruin before they began. Success meant their first client, validation, and a direct, undeniable challenge to Thorne. Elena broke the silence. "How? We have no truck. No operating license yet. No insurance bonded for cargo." "The truck first," Luis said, his eyes gleaming with sudden purpose. "I know a guy. Runs a salvage yard out past the old mill. He's got an old Freightliner box truck. Engine's solid, body's rough, but it runs. He owes me a favor. Big favor. We could get it cheap. Maybe a handshake deal, payment later?" "Insurance?" Maria asked, practical despite her fear. "We can't move without bonded cargo insurance. That costs real money." Mateo looked at Elena. The savings account number glowed accusingly in his mind. The money earmarked for Sophia's future, for stability. Elena held his gaze, her jaw set. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The unspoken agreement passed between them. It was everything or nothing. "We used the savings," Mateo said, the words tasting like ashes, "for the bare minimum insurance bond. Just for this one shipment. Just to prove we can do it." Saying it aloud made the risk terrifyingly real. The safety net was gone. And if customs doesn't flag the shipment? Javier asked, voicing the lurking fear. If Thorne somehow gets it through? Then we lose nothing but time, Mateo said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. Rojas gets his coffee. We go back to the drawing board. But Jenkins' error, it's fundamental. I'd bet everything on it being caught. And I am betting everything, he thought grimly. The decision hung in the oil-scented air. It was madness. It was their only shot. We do it, Maria said, surprising everyone, including herself. Her voice was small but firm. I'm tired of being scared. Tired of Thorne. Luis clapped a hand on Javier's shoulder. Come on, hermano. Let's show them how dispatch should run. Javier took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. All right, but we plan this like a military operation. No mistakes. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next 4 days were a crucible. The tension at Thorne Logistics was a living thing. Mateo moved like a ghost, hyper-aware, feeding Thorne just enough mundane competence to avoid immediate suspicion while covertly monitoring the Cafe Aroma shipment through the internal system. He saw Jenkins' incorrect code, saw the booking confirmation, saw the container loaded onto the ship in Buenaventura. Every step closer ratcheted the pressure. Meanwhile, in the shadow world of Papa Julio's garage, they scrambled. Luis secured the battered freightliner. "Oh, reliable," he dubbed it, though it coughed ominously on startup. Elena, leveraging her meticulous research, secured the absolute minimum cargo insurance bond, draining a critical chunk of their savings. Mateo prepared the flawless customs paperwork for Cafe Aroma, his fingers flying over the keyboard in the dim garage light long into the night. Javier plotted the optimal route from the port terminal to Rojas's warehouse, factoring in traffic patterns he knew intimately from his years at Thorne. Maria, using a prepaid phone Mateo bought with cash, became their discreet liaison with Senor Rojas, hinting at a potential alternative solution should Thorne encounter difficulties, careful never to promise anything prematurely. The fear was a constant companion. Every unfamiliar car slowing near Papa Julio's house made Mateo's heart lurch. Elena jumped at unexpected phone calls. Luis reported seeing a nondescript sedan parked near the salvage yard twice. Thorne's invisible net felt like it was tightening. Monday arrived. The container ship docked. Mateo watched the Thorne internal tracking system like a hawk. By mid-morning, the status updated. Asterisk held at Terminal 3, customs inspection requested. Documentation discrepancy. Asterisk. A surge of fierce triumph warred with crushing anxiety. Step 1 was confirmed. Thorne had failed. Jenkins' incompetence, enabled by Thorne's neglect, had delivered their opportunity. Now came the dangerous part. Maria made the call from the prepaid phone. Senor Rojas? It's Maria. Regarding your coffee shipment. I have unfortunate news. Thorne's paperwork has an error. Customs has it held. It could be days before it's resolved. She paused, letting the dismay sink in. However, there might be another option. A small, new logistics service. Very discreet. They specialize in difficult situations. They have the correct paperwork prepared already. They could potentially retrieve your container today, clear customs, and deliver it to your warehouse by. She checked Javier's route plan. 5 p.m. If you authorize them as your agent immediately. The pause on the other end was agonizing. They could almost hear Senor Rojas's frantic calculations, the cost of delay, the reliability of Thorne crumbling, the risk of trusting an unknown entity. Finally, his voice, strained but decisive, came through. Hoy, 5 p.m. See, do it. Please. Tell them do it. What do I need to sign? They moved fast. Mateo, using a public library computer far from his home or work, transmitted the authorization forms Rojas signed electronically. Luis, an old reliable, already positioned near the port, rumbled towards Terminal 3 the moment confirmation came through. Mateo met him there in his own car, heart pounding against his ribs, carrying the perfect customs packet. The port was a chaotic symphony of noise and motion. Towering cranes, stacks of multicolored containers, the rumble of trucks and shouts of dock workers. The air reeked of salt, diesel, and fish. Mateo spotted the Thorne Logistics truck idling near the customs office, the driver arguing with an official, frustration evident in his posture. Jenkins' mess, Mateo thought with grim satisfaction. Luis maneuvered old reliable with surprising grace for its size. Mateo approached the customs counter, presenting Rojas's authorization and his own impeccable documents. The customs officer, a weary-looking woman with sharp eyes, scanned the papers, comparing them to the manifest on her screen. She frowned at the Thorne documents still displayed. "Thorne's code is wrong," Mateo said calmly, pointing it out. "This one," he tapped his own form, "is correct. Harmonized System 901.21 for green coffee beans, Colombian origin. All supporting certificates attached." The officer scrutinized the documents, her eyes flicking between Mateo's packet and the screen. The seconds stretched, each one an eternity. Luis shifted nervously behind him. Mateo forced himself to breathe evenly, projecting a quiet competence he hoped masked the terror beneath. Finally, the officer stamped the forms with a decisive thud. "Paperwork's in order," she said, sliding the clearance documents back. "Container C, 7892, Bay 14. Get it moved." Relief, sharp and sweet, flooded Mateo. "Thank you." He turned, catching Luis's wide-eyed look of disbelief mixed with triumph. They hurried towards Bay 14, the Thorne driver still embroiled in his argument. The sight of the large container, marked with Café Aroma's logo, felt like a physical manifestation of their defiance. Luis expertly backed Old Reliable up to the container. The clang of the locking mechanism securing the load echoed like a victory bell in Mateo's ears, though the race was only half run. As they pulled away from the terminal, the Thorne driver stared after them, confusion etched on his face. Mateo didn't look back. He followed Luis in his car, acting as an extra set of eyes, scanning for tails, for any sign of Thorne's awareness. Every stoplight felt like a trap. Every police cruiser caused a jolt of adrenaline. They navigated the city streets, Javier's optimal route proving its worth, avoiding major snarls. By 4:45 p.m., Old Reliable was backing into the loading dock of Café Aroma's small warehouse in the heart of Little Bogotá. Senor Rojas stood waiting, wringing his hands, flanked by two nervous employees. As Luis cut the engine and hopped out, Rojas rushed forward, his face a mask of disbelief and burgeoning hope. "Lo hicieron," he exclaimed, clapping Luis on the shoulder, then turning to Mateo who had just pulled up. "Incredible. Thorne called an hour ago, said maybe tomorrow. Maybe." He gestured wildly at the container. "And you have it here. Promised by 5, Senor Rojas," Mateo said, managing a genuine smile despite the exhaustion and lingering fear. "Your paperwork was perfect. Just needed the right hands on it." He handed over the customs clearance documents. Rojas scanned them, his eyes widening. This is better than Thorne ever did. Clear. Concise. He looked from Mateo to Luis, to the slightly battered but capable truck. "Who are you people?" "We're Rivera Logistics," Mateo said, the name tasting bold and new on his tongue. "We specialize in reliable service for businesses Thorne overlooks." Rojas clasped Mateo's hand, his grip tight with emotion. "You saved my week. My customers. This is a miracle. How much? Name your price." "It's worth double today." Mateo quoted a fair figure, significantly less than Thorne's premium rate, including a small surcharge for the emergency service. Rojas didn't hesitate. He paid cash on the spot, peeling bills from a thick roll. "You have my business, senor. And I will tell everyone at the Mercado who saved my cafe." Everyone. As they drove away from Little Bogotá, the cash a tangible weight in Mateo's pocket, the first real income for Rivera Logistics, a profound silence settled in the car. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a deep tremor of exertion and the dawning realization of what they'd just pulled off. They had a client. They had proven their concept. They had struck a direct blow. But the victory felt fragile, shadowed. As Mateo turned onto the street leading towards Papa Julio's neighborhood, his headlights swept over a familiar, nondescript sedan parked halfway down the block, facing the garage. It hadn't been there when they left. The engine was off, but the silhouette of a figure sat behind the wheel, watching. The cold dread returned, sharper than before. Thorne wasn't just suspicious anymore. He was hunting. Their first win had painted a target on their backs, and the stakes had just exploded. The quiet street suddenly felt like a battleground, the dimly lit garage a vulnerable outpost. Mateo slowed the car, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the taste of triumph instantly soured by the metallic tang of imminent danger. The gauntlet hadn't just been picked up. It had been thrown back with force, and the echo of its impact was drawing the enemy right to their doorstep. The nondescript sedan sat like a coiled predator in the twilight gloom. Mateo cut his engine 2 houses down, the sudden silence amplifying the frantic thudding of his heart. Elena, waiting anxiously by the garage's side door, her face pale in the dim light filtering through the dusty window, met his gaze. Fear, sharp and cold, warred with the fierce protectiveness burning in her eyes. Luis, who had followed in OL reliable and parked it discreetly around the corner, materialized beside Mateo, his usual bravado replaced by grim alertness. "He's been there 20 minutes, Elena whispered, pulling them inside the garage. Maria and Javier huddled near the battered table, the map of their nascent empire suddenly looking like a target. Just watching. The air in the garage, usually thick with determination and motor oil, now tasted of copper and dread. Their triumph with cafe aroma felt like a distant dream, overshadowed by the chilling reality of Thorne's reach. The cash payment, their first tangible success, lay forgotten on the table. "We can't stay here," Maria breathed, her voice trembling. "He knows. Running makes us look guilty," Javier countered, though his knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the table. "Guilty of what?" "Offering better service." "Guilty of daring," Mateo said, his voice low but cutting through the panic. He walked to the grimy window, peering through a sliver of clean glass. The silhouette in the car hadn't moved. Thorne doesn't see competition. He sees betrayal, insolence. He sees our kind stepping out of line. He turned back to the group, the ember of defiance reigniting, fanned by the direct threat. "We don't run. We build higher walls. Faster." The next 48 hours were a blur of high-stakes maneuvering conducted under the oppressive weight of surveillance. They abandoned the garage as a base during daylight hours, conducting whispered strategy sessions in Elena's kitchen after Sofia was asleep, using coded texts and prepaid phones. Mateo continued working at Thorne Logistics, a masterclass in nerve-wracking duplicity. He performed his duties with robotic efficiency, acutely aware that every keystroke might be monitored, every conversation potentially reported back. Thorne's gaze seemed colder, more calculating, though he said nothing directly. The silence was more menacing than any accusation. Luis, utilizing his network of contacts forged on the road, secured a short-term lease on a small, unmarked storage unit across town. A temporary, defensible bunker for OL reliable and their sparse equipment, paid for with the cafe aroma cash. Elena, channeling her fear into furious action, accelerated the licensing process, leveraging every connection and navigating bureaucratic hurdles with steely determination. Their vulnerability was a stark reminder. Rivera Logistics needed legitimacy, fast. The pressure cooker exploded midweek. Mateo was finalizing a complex international shipment for Thorne when his desk phone rang. It was Thorne's assistant, her voice devoid of its usual clipped professionalism, replaced by something closer to pity. "Mr. Rivera, Mr. Thorne requires your presence in his office. Immediately. And bring your personal belongings." A cold wave washed over him. Belongings, the word tolled like a funeral bell. He looked around his cramped workstation, the ergonomic keyboard he'd bought himself, the framed photo of Sofia beaming, the small potted succulent Elena insisted brought life to the sterile space. This wasn't just a meeting, it was an execution. He gathered his things slowly, deliberately, buying seconds to steady his breathing, to lock the mask of impassivity in place. The walk to Thorne's office felt longer than ever, the eyes of colleagues burning into his back, heavy with unspoken questions. Thorne wasn't alone. A stern-faced man in a sharp, expensive suit sat in the visitor's chair, radiating quiet authority. Thorne stood behind his steel desk, his expression a disturbing mix of vindictive triumph and icy contempt. He didn't invite Mateo to sit. "Rivera," Thorne began, his voice dripping with disdain. "Meet Mr. Aris Thorne, my brother, and head of corporate security." He gestured to the man, whose gaze swept over Mateo with detached assessment, like a pathologist examining a specimen. "It seems," Thorne continued, leaning forward, planting his knuckles on the desk, "your ambition extends beyond your station, beyond loyalty." Mateo remained silent, his eyes fixed on a point just above Thorne's head. Any protest would be fuel. We are aware, Heiress Thorne spoke, his voice smooth and chillingly calm, of certain extracurricular activities, a certain Freightliner truck, suspicious meetings, and the curious coincidence surrounding the mishandling of the cafe aroma shipment. He paused, letting the implication hang. While proving direct theft is currently challenging, his eyes locked onto Mateo's. The breach of trust is undeniable. Soliciting Thorne Logistics clients while under our employment is a terminable offense, as is the misuse of company resources and proprietary information. Thorne Sr. smirked. Your little community outreach fantasy, Rivera? It's over. You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. He picked up a folder from his desk, Mateo's personnel file, and dropped it into a waiting cardboard box with a dismissive thud. Clean out your desk. And consider yourself lucky we're not pursuing legal action. Yet. But rest assured, he added, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, we'll be watching. Your people have a habit of overreaching. It never ends well. The words "you're fired" echoed, but strangely, they didn't carry the crushing weight Mateo expected. Instead, a profound sense of liberation washed over him, sharp and clean. The shackles were off. He looked Thorne directly in the eye, no longer the subordinate, but an adversary. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice calm, resonant, carrying across the silent office. For clarifying where I don't belong. He turned, picked up the box containing the meager remnants of his Thorne career, and walked out without looking back, flanked by a stone-faced security guard. The steel door clicked shut behind him for the last time, sealing the end of one life and the unfettered, terrifying beginning of another. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Fired, exposed, and with Thorne's corporate security undoubtedly digging deeper, the stakes were existential. Survival was no longer about building a dream. It was about preventing their fragile venture from being crushed before it could stand. The storage unit became their war room. Fear was a constant companion, but it was forged into a weapon of hypervigilance. They operated like ghosts. Maria handled client communications through encrypted channels. Luis moved OL, reliable only under cover of darkness or during chaotic port shifts. Javier plotted routes with paranoid precision, avoiding any area with Thorne Logistics presence. Elena became their fortress, managing the rapidly draining finances with eagle-eyed scrutiny while shielding Sophia from the storm clouds gathering over her parents. Their salvation came from the very community Thorne despised. Senor Rojas proved true to his word. He didn't just use Rivera Logistics, he championed them. At the bustling Mercado Latino, over fragrant cups of his rescued Colombian coffee, he spoke passionately about the little company that actually delivers. Word spread like wildfire through the intricate network of small, immigrant-owned businesses, the family-run bakeries struggling with Thorne's erratic schedules, the importers drowning in unexplained fees, the fabric shops whose delicate shipments arrived damaged due to careless handling. They came to Rivera Logistics not just for service, but out of solidarity, out of shared resentment for the giant who ignored them. Each new client, each successfully delivered shipment paid for with cash or barter, a side of beef from the carniceria, bolts of vibrant fabric for Elena's hopeful dreams of office curtains, was a defiant brick laid in their wall against Thorne. Mateo poured every waking hour into the business. His knowledge of Thorne's weaknesses, the inefficiencies, the neglected clients, the arrogant assumptions, now his greatest asset. He crafted bespoke solutions, simplified bilingual billing, flexible scheduling windows, proactive customs guidance, services Thorne deemed unprofitable but which were lifelines for his clients. He recruited carefully. A brilliant, underappreciated dispatcher Thorne had recently laid off. A veteran driver known for his meticulous care of cargo, passed over for promotion one too many times. Rivera Logistics grew, not by stealing Thorne's crown jewels, but by gathering the scattered gems he'd carelessly discarded. Thorne struck back, predictably and viciously. Anonymous tips to city licensing departments triggered audits. Rumors, dark and unfounded, began to circulate among larger suppliers. Whispers of Rivera's instability, potential insurance lapses. A key shipment for a growing Mexican restaurant chain was mysteriously delayed when a vital permit application went missing. Mateo recognized Thorne's fingerprints on every obstacle. It was a war of attrition, designed to strangle them slowly. The pressure was immense, the financial margins razor-thin, sleep a forgotten luxury. Yet, each attack solidified their resolve and deepened the loyalty of their client base, who saw the harassment for what it was. The turning point arrived cloaked in municipal bureaucracy. The city announced a request for proposals for a crucial contract, managing the logistics for its annual Unity Festival, a sprawling celebration of the city's diverse communities held in Riverside Park. It involved coordinating hundreds of vendors, stage equipment, food supplies, and waste management, a complex, high-profile operation. Thorne Logistics, with its established presence and corporate sheen, was the presumed shoe-in. For Mateo, it was more than a contract. It was a chance for public validation, a platform to prove Rivera Logistics wasn't just a scrappy underdog, but a capable, professional force. They prepared like generals for a decisive battle. Elena crafted a proposal that wasn't just a bid, but a manifesto. It highlighted their deep understanding of the communities involved, their proven agility and complex coordination, showcasing the Unity Festival-like demands they already handled for multiple Mercado events, and their commitment to fair labor practices, a subtle contrast to whispers about Thorne's workforce treatment. Mateo personally oversaw every detail, his presentation rehearsed to perfection, infused with the quiet confidence born of overcoming relentless adversity. They submitted their proposal, a David's sling aimed squarely at Goliath, knowing Thorne would pull every string to crush their bid. The weeks waiting for the decision were agony. Thorne's attacks intensified, a smear campaign in a local business journal questioning Rivera's capacity, sudden, stringent inspections of OL reliable, which passed, thanks to Luis's obsessive maintenance. Mateo felt like he was holding his breath, the future of everything they'd built, every sacrifice they'd made, hanging in the balance. The call came on a rain-lashed Tuesday morning. Mateo stood in their new office, a small, bright space above a vibrant fabric shop in Little Bogota, paid for by months of grinding work and community support. Sunlight, rare for the season, struggled through the streaked window. Elena sat at her desk, Sophia's drawing of the dragon butterfly pinned proudly above it. Luis was out on a delivery, Javier coordinating the day's routes from his cluttered corner. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the tense quiet. It was the city procurement office. Mateo answered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hand. He listened, his expression unreadable. Elena watched him, her hand frozen over her keyboard, her breath caught in her throat. Javier paused, the dispatch radio crackling softly. Mateo's eyes met Elena's. A slow, profound transformation spread across his face, the exhaustion melting away, replaced by an incredulous, radiant relief that deepened into a triumphant, tear-brightened smile. He didn't need to say a word. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Javier let out a low, triumphant whistle. They had won. Rivera Logistics had secured the Unity Festival contract. News traveled faster than Luis's Freightliner on an open highway. By that afternoon, their modest office buzzed with elated clients, well-wishers from the Mercado, and curious reporters drawn by the story of the underdog company triumphing over the established giant. Amidst the joyful chaos, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Reginald Thorne emerged, his face a mask of barely contained fury, looking profoundly out of place amidst the vibrant street life. He pushed through the small crowd gathered outside Rivera's door, his expensive shoes tracking rainwater onto the clean floor. The cheerful chatter died instantly. All eyes turned to the confrontation brewing. Thorne stopped just inside the doorway, his gaze sweeping over the small, bustling office. The mismatched furniture, the map covered in client pins, the diverse faces of the Rivera team radiating defiant pride. His lip curled in a familiar sneer of disdain. He focused on Mateo, who stood calmly near Elena's desk, the city's contract documents visibly prominent beside him. So, Thorne's voice cut through the silence, cold and sharp. This is the enterprise you built after stealing from me? A glorified delivery service crammed above a discount rag shop. He took a step forward, his presence radiating contempt. You think this flea market operation compares to Thorne Logistics? That it belongs in the same league? He gestured dismissively around the room, his gaze lingering on Luis's worn work jacket, Maria's modest blouse, Javier's rugged features. Look around you, Rivera. This isn't a company. It's a charity case for people who couldn't hack it in the real world. The air crackled. The supportive crowd outside murmured angrily. Elena moved protectively closer to Mateo, her eyes blazing. But Mateo simply held Thorne's gaze. He saw not the powerful executive, but the small, fearful man whose world was shrinking. He remembered the sterile cold of Thorne's office, the crushing weight of those words. You people don't belong here. A profound calm settled over Mateo. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet certainty in his words carried through the room, silencing Thorne's bluster. Look around you, Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice resonant, clear. He gestured not just at his team, but at the clients crowded in the doorway, at the vibrant street visible through the window, the lifeblood Thorne had ignored. This is the real world. These are the people who build it, feed it, clothe it. You spent years telling us we didn't belong in your world. He paused, letting the memory hang heavy. So we built our own. One where integrity matters more than arrogance. Where service isn't a premium, it's a promise. Where people, his gaze swept over his team, his clients, landing back on Thorne with devastating finality, are valued, not dismissed because of where they come from. He took a single step forward, not in aggression, but in assertion. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. You asked if we belong in the same league? We don't play the same game, Mr. Thorne. We never did. He held up the city contract, the official seal gleaming. The city just recognized who truly serves its whole community. Your world, he concluded, his voice dropping to a steely whisper that carried absolute conviction. You don't belong here anymore. Thorne flinched as if struck. The color drained from his face, replaced by a sickly pallor. The sneer vanished, leaving behind only stunned disbelief and the dawning horror of obsolescence. The raw contempt in Mateo's echoed words, his words, weaponized against him, was a mirror held up to his own irrelevance. He looked from Mateo's unwavering gaze to the faces of the Rivera team, united and resolute, to the crowd outside whose expressions held no fear, only a cool assessment of a fallen giant. The silence in the small office was absolute, profound. With a strangled sound that wasn't quite a word, Reginald Thorne turned on his heel and walked out, his expensive shoulders slumped, disappearing into the rain-washed street, a specter of a fading era. The hushed silence held for a breath, then erupted into a wave of triumphant cheers that spilled out into the street, a vibrant affirmation echoing through the heart of the community they served. Later that evening, the celebrations quieted. The office was empty except for Mateo and Elena. The city contract lay on the desk, a tangible symbol of their improbable victory. Outside, the lights of the fabric shop below cast warm, colorful patterns on the ceiling. Mateo stood by the window, looking out at the bustling street. The very streets Thorne had deemed unworthy, now pulsing with the lifeblood of their success. Elena came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. He was wrong, you know, she said softly, resting her head against his shoulder. About everything. Mateo squeezed her hand, watching a group of laughing teenagers spill out of the taqueria across the street. He was blind, he murmured. Blinded by thinking his way was the only way, that some people mattered less. He thought of the grueling months, the fear, the relentless pressure, the community that had lifted them up. Belonging isn't about fitting into someone else's narrow idea of where you should be. It's about building your own place, brick by brick, with your own hands, your own heart, and proving its worth not through exclusion, but through the strength you create together. He turned to Elena, seeing the same fierce journey reflected in her eyes. We didn't just build a company, Elena. We built proof. Proof that dignity, hard work, and believing in each other can build something stronger than any wall prejudice tries to put up. Downstairs, Sophia's laughter floated up, clear and bright. She was playing CEO at Elena's desk, her small voice issuing serious commands to an audience of stuffed animals. Mateo smiled, the weariness of the battle replaced by a deep, resonant peace. The view from their own window, earned through every tear and triumph, was worth infinitely more than anything Thorne's cold, sterile world could ever offer. The true measure of belonging was written not in the size of an office, but in the shared heartbeat of the community thriving outside their door. Thank you guys so much. I do appreciate the support. Please do like and leave a comment and tell us where you are watching it from.